International House for this meeting. I'm hoping that everyone's here now. So we'll start with some introductions. My name is Claire Wilcox. I'm a councillor in Streatham South and I'm chair of the Planning Applications Committee. I'd like to ask members of the committee to introduce themselves and then officers.
Good evening, my name is Diana Morris. I'm a councillor in Thornton Ward and I'm vice chair of the committee.
Good evening, my name is Mohammed Sidat. I'm a councillor in Streatham Wells and I'm a full member of the committee.
Hello, I'm a councillor in Streatham Hill. My name is Atkins and I'm a substitute member of the committee.
Hi, I'm Malcolm Clark, councillor in Streatham Wells and a member of the committee.
I'm Nigel Hazelden, I represent Capel Town Ward and I'm very glad to join the committee as a full member today.
Good evening, Edward Lewis, a solicitor of the council.
Good evening, Ian Hyde, Dean Monty Hyde, the Lambeth Transport Planning Team.
Dale Jones, Planning Officer for the Garden Bridge Project. Richard McCarran, Principal Planning Officer.
Good evening, I'm Rob O'Sullivan, Major Applications Coordinator.
Good evening, David Joyce, Assistant Director of Planning, Transport and Development.
Good evening, Henry Langford, Democratic Services Officer and Committee Clerk.
Thank you very much. Now, there should be some committee papers at the back of the room. If you don't have a copy of those, they're also available online. What we're going to do in a moment is order the business, so we will decide which of the two main items which order we're going to take them this evening. First of all, though, I have some very sad news, which is that our colleague, Councillor Francis, who was councillor in Gypsy Hill Ward in the borough of Lambeth, sadly passed away, not last weekend, but the weekend before. And we thought, given that there are not very many formal meetings going on at the moment, it would be appropriate for us to show our respect for the work that he did as a councillor in his ward from 2010 when he was elected as an active member of his ward and a very, very valued member of the council. If we could stand and have a minute's silence in memory of him. If you'd like to join me in that, please. Thank you. Just to let any of you know who did know Councillor Francis, that there is a book of condolences, and that's going to be held at West Norwood Health Centre, which is in his ward, and people are welcome to go there and sign that and leave messages for his family. So now we move to the business of this evening, and as you know, if you've been to this committee meeting before, we take a show of hands to see how many people here have come along in relation to a particular item. So can I first of all see all those who are not in favour, you don't get to vote, unfortunately, that would be an interesting way of doing it. All those who are here to hear the item relating to the Garden Bridge conditions. And all those who are here in relation to St Gabriel's College. Okay, so we will take the Garden Bridge conditions first. Before that, we move to item 1 of our agenda, which is declaration of pecuniary interest. So can I ask committee members if they have any pecuniary interest that they would like to declare? No, thank you. We now move to item 2, which is to agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of April. Does anyone have anything that they would like to say in relation to those minutes? Councillor Morris?
Yes, I'd just like to propose a very minor amendment for clarification, which is under item 8 on page 7. The first paragraph under 86 to 88 Gresham just to change the fourth line of the main paragraph from mix of land to mix of land uses. Sorry to be pedantic about that, but I think it needs to be changed. Thanks.
Okay, so can I ask that that is amended in the minutes, and then can I ask members to agree those as the minutes of that meeting? Can I see all those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. So now we will move to the first item of business for the evening, which is the Garden Bridge conditions. Can I first of all ask those who are registered speakers to come and join us at the front here? We can have objectors to my left and supporters to the right. I think I've got Michael Ball, Hannah Quigley and Nicholas Timms as objectors, and Paul Foster, Michael Wood and Gorbola Trizinulic. Okay, and then also the ward councillors have all indicated that there are only see two at the moment.
Yeah, unfortunately, Councillor Craig has got childcare issues, so he can't be used.
Okay.
Chair, Nicholas can't be here, is he? Last year he was 26.
Okay, I don't have a problem with that. Thank you. Okay, so now everyone's seated. If you just introduce yourselves and say who you're representing, no more than that, if we can move in that direction.
My name is Gorbola Trizinulic. I'm representing Garden Bridge Trust regarding the site.
Paul Foster from the Garden Bridge Operations Team.
Michael Wood, representing the Garden Bridge.
Gillian Melling, local resident, objecting to the Garden Bridge. Hannah Quigley, local resident and local worker.
Michael Ball, Waterloo Community Development Group.
And the ward councillors. Sorry, Councillor Mosley, Bishop's Ward.
And Councillor Kane, Bishop's Ward.
Lovely, thank you very much. So I think most people around the table here know what happens next, but what we're going to do is have a presentation from officers, which will highlight the main points of the report and any items aspects which should be brought to the attention of members. We will then have an opportunity for objectors, first of all, and then supporters, and then the ward councillors to address members, and we'll have 2 minutes. So if we can move now to an officer presentation, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This presentation covers the 2 applications on the screen which have been submitted pursuant to Condition 6 and 46 of Planning Permission Reference 14/02792/FUL for the development commonly known as the Garden Bridge. The permission was granted subject to 46 conditions, and the applications before members tonight are firstly 16/00269/DET, which seeks to discharge Condition 6, which requires the approval of a scar and accretion monitoring and mitigation plan. The second application, 15/05217/DET, seeks to discharge Condition 46. This requires the approval of an illegal trading, antisocial behaviour, crowd control and general enforcement management plan. Members are advised that there have been a number of changes to the presentation since the draft version which was circulated to them last week. As such, please refer to the screens as opposed to your presentation packs. So this slide is a refresher of the application site. This has previously been presented to members on a number of occasions. However, if there are any points of clarification that members require, please do let me know and I'll be happy to answer. Moving on to slide 3, as discussed, Condition 6 requires the approval of a scar and accretion monitoring plan. The condition was requested by Thames Tideway Tunnel and the Environment Agency on the basis of a lack of clarity at the time of the determination of the original application of potential scar and accretion impacts on the Garden Bridge, on the riverbed and river walls. For the purposes of clarification, members should note that the insertion of a physical object into a river, such as a bridge pier, can result in changes to the speed and direction of water flows. These changes to the hydrological conditions can result in the removal of sediment from the riverbed. This is known as river scar, and if kept unchecked, can compromise the integrity of bridge structures or flood defences. Conversely, river accretion is where the changes to water flows result in the gradual deposition of sediment. This can result in problems for passing vessels where accretion changes conditions within the navigational channel of a river. So the image on screen now, this shows the Garden Bridge in situ. As we've seen from the wording on the previous slide, condition 6 is a very technical condition which requires analysis of the change in water flows and sediment activity as a result of the proposed bridge, and an understanding of how these changes may affect the surrounding physical infrastructure, including the river wall, which I'm just marking here, and also the bridge piers where they enter the river here. The condition also seeks to ensure that the Thames Tideway Tunnel, which is to be constructed beneath the riverbed, and the Garden Bridge are not compromised by the implementation of each other. Given the highly technical nature of this condition, consultation was conducted with the most relevant technical consultees, including the Environment Agency, Thames Tideway Tunnel, and the Port of London Authority. The submitted document identifies possible hazards that will be sensitive to river scour, including the South Bank River Wall and foreshore, the cofferdams that will be excavated during the river during construction, and the bridge piers that would hold the bridge up. In each of these hazards, the submitted document concludes that there would generally be a low risk of river scour. However, in order to provide suitable mitigation, physical scour protection would be installed around the bridge piers, extending to a radius of 12.5 metres. These would be flush with the riverbed in order to minimise potential for any impacts from passing vessels. In addition, a detailed monitoring programme for river scour has been agreed with relevant consultees. The submitted document demonstrates that regular monitoring of the cofferdams, river wall and foreshore would take place during the construction period, with agreed additional temporary scour protection measures implemented should identified trigger levels be breached. Post-completion scour monitoring would take place on a biennial basis, unless it is agreed with the Environment Agency that a different frequency of monitoring is required, or that no further monitoring is necessary as a stable environment has been achieved. For the purposes of clarification, the submitted plan does not include monitoring or mitigation proposals in relation to river accretion due to the minor nature of potential accretion, which would only be likely to occur outside the navigational channel for passing river vessels. In addition, the document demonstrates that there will be no interference with the Thames Tideway Tunnel. The submitted document has been subject to extensive consultation with relevant consultees, both prior to submission and throughout the consultation period. These consultees include the Environment Agency, Thames Tideway Tunnel and the Port of London Authority, all of whom have raised no objection to the submitted details. For the purpose of clarification, the initial consultation responses received by officers from the Environment Agency requested clarification on a number of matters. These matters were addressed within the revised submissions, including the final version dated the 21st of March 2016. The Environment Agency subsequently confirmed on the 8th of April that they raised no objections to the discharge of this planning condition, subject to the informative which is listed here on the screen. On this basis, officers recommend the approval of details of Condition 6 of the permission. So moving on to the application pursuant to Condition 46, I'd like to draw members' attention to the relevant parts of the condition listed in green. The condition requires the approval of an illegal trading, antisocial behaviour, crowd control and general enforcement management plan prior to the commencement of works. Members should also note the wording of the last section of this condition, which is just here. This stipulates that the details should form part of the operations management plan and operations and maintenance business plan, which is to be worked up and secured through the Section 106 obligations, which I'll discuss a little further in the presentation. The condition was imposed following consultation responses to the parent application from various stakeholders, including the South Bank Employers Group. Members should note that extensive consultation has taken place with a range of relevant stakeholders in relation to Condition 46, including the Metropolitan Police, Lambeth Trading Standards, Lambeth Transport Planning, Lambeth Planning Enforcement, South Bank Employers Group, and Transport for London. Revisions were made to the submitted document in response to consultee comments. The final version was received on the 21st of April 2016, with the sole change to the document being the exceptional operations indicative queue management plan, which is listed on page 59. Moving on to the next slide, the submitted document is underpinned by a list of key principles to deal with issues associated with illegal trading, antisocial behaviour, crowd control and general enforcement. This includes an agreed commitment to a minimum number of visitor hosts, with the document explaining that there will be a minimum of 6 visitor hosts at any one time, in addition to a duty manager. This core staffing level will be supplemented by a additional staff during visitor periods, and at peak times it is envisaged there would be a minimum of 10 visitor hosts. Visitor hosts would also have delegated authority through the Community Safety Accreditation Scheme to deal with a full range of antisocial behaviour issues, including the ability to issue fixed penalty notices, require names and addresses, and confiscate alcohol and tobacco where necessary. Staff will also be appropriately trained and qualified in relation to security, crowd safety, event safety, and counter-terrorism awareness. The key principles also require commitments to intelligence and information sharing with organisations such as the South Bank Visitor Management Group and Safer London Business Partnerships, as well as ongoing cooperation with the Metropolitan Police and British Transport Police. The key principles also include a commitment to ongoing consultation with the local residential and business community. So in terms of dealing with illegal trading and antisocial behaviour, the submitted document has looked at the existing crime picture in the wider South Bank area using evidence compiled by the Metropolitan Police. The document undertakes a risk assessment of the likely vulnerabilities resulting from the Garden Bridge and its associated number of visitors, and identifies that a number of threats that are likely to occur, including illegal gambling, illegal trading, rough sleeping, and aggressive begging. In response to this, the submitted document sets out an overview of the security measures and resources to be put in place to be able to deal with the full range of these threats and mitigate against their impact. Primarily, they would be dealt with via visitor hosts who would patrol the bridge and the immediate surrounds and would be suitably trained to deal with these situations. They would be assisted by a high specification CCTV system and an appropriate lighting system. A coordinated approach would also be taken with local stakeholders, including the existing South Bank Employers Group Patrol, which would make use of local radio systems and patrols. The Garden Bridge Trust would also be a member of the Safer London Business Partnership, which is a crime reduction scheme run in partnership with the Metropolitan Police in conjunction with Westminster, Southwark and Lambeth Safer Borough initiatives. The submitted document also contains a draft set of conditions of entry. These are considered to be similar to those already in place at other locations, including the Royal Parks. These conditions seek to make it clear what restrictions are in place, and the visitor host can take enforcement action against certain prohibited acts, including collecting or soliciting money, conducting trade or business, and the lighting of fires and barbecues. All of these details will be worked up formally as part of the operations management plan. So the submitted document also seeks to address crowd management. In order to do so, it's important to note that the crowd control plan, which forms Appendix B of the submitted document, has been based on the core principles, data and assumptions that are contained within the transport assessment, which was approved as part of the parent planning permission. The infographic on the screen helps explain what the headlines of the approved transport assessment are. So the top row, just listed here, these relate to the dwell time and state that the approved transport assessment has established an average walking time across the bridge would be 5 minutes, but the different users would dwell on the bridge for different periods of time. The approved transport assessment tested an average dwell time of 15 minutes and 25 minutes and demonstrated that peak demand could be accommodated. The second and third rows, just here, these deal with peak demand, and this established the peak demand to be between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon during the summer season, when over 4,000 visitors would be expected. However, as explained here, the transport assessment also built in a 25% uplift in visitor numbers for the first year based on the experiences of the London Eye. Resultantly, a peak hour demand of 5,000 visitors was tested. The bottom row explains that the approved transport assessment was based on a maximum capacity of the bridge deck of 2,500 people, and this was based on evacuation purposes. Given this maximum capacity, the flow of pedestrians on the bridge deck would achieve a through and walkway level service of A, which indicates the highest possible rating and the free movement of pedestrians. So in terms of how crowds would actually physically be managed, the submitted document has accounted for 3 operational states for the proposed bridge: normal, elevated and exceptional. Normal is the default operating model where no direction is provided and crowds flow normally onto and off the bridge as per their desired route. Based on the average 25-minute dwell time from the approved transport assessment, there will be no queues in the normal state of operation, even in the Saturday peak hour. However, should numbers on the bridge reach 2,000 to 2,200, then the mode of operation would change to elevated, This will be calculated using a high specification CCTV system, which would enable the Garden Bridge Trust to count visitor numbers. This visitor number trigger would see the introduction of a one-way flow system implemented by the visitor host positioned in strategic locations, including the entrances to the staircases, just here on Queen's Walk, and on the eastern staircase here, again on Queen's Walk. They will be complemented by a tensor barrier system, which is just indicated by this line here, and temporary digital signage to provide directional information at the various entry points to make it clear whether it is entry or no entry. On the south landing building, the ingress flow would be via the eastern staircase here, and the egress flow will be via the western staircase here. This elevated scenario would slow the rate of arrivals onto the bridge deck by creating an informal moving queue of up to 200 people in order to manage the numbers of people on it and prevent capacity being reached. The submitted document envisages that the normal and elevated scenarios will cover all planned for events. However, as part of discussions, officers have secured further exceptional state of operation to cover a worst-case scenario where static queues would begin to form. In doing so, Garden Bridge Trust have tested how their system would work, using dwell times increased beyond those tested as part of the approved transport assessment. This includes an average 30-minute dwell time and an average 40-minute dwell time. The Condition 46 addendum document submitted by the applicant explains that an average 30-minute dwell time will be suitably managed under the elevated operations scenario, even in the Saturday peak hour. However, where the average dwell time is increased to 40 minutes, the exceptional state of operation would be required. Officers would repeat that such an event is considered to be extremely unlikely, but the image on screen demonstrates how this would be managed through the implementation of a formal queuing area in this area here, in the northeastern corner of the podium level of the south landing building. The queue would be facilitated by a tensor barrier system similar to those seen in airports and would be erected by visitor hosts. It would be solely located on the podium level and would not impinge upon the operation of Queen's Walk. The queue would have a capacity to accommodate over 800 people. Waiting times for a queue of 500 people would be approximately 15 minutes. This would increase to approximately 30 minutes if the queue increased to 800 visitors. In summary, officers consider that all key requirements of the original condition have been addressed. In particular, that adequate resources, protocols and collaboration would be in place in order to suitably mitigate against antisocial behaviour and illegal trading, and that where necessary, crowd control would be suitably managed and would not interfere with the operation of Queen's Walk. Officers reiterate that the submitted document has been subject to extensive consultation with relevant technical consultees, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, and that no objections have been raised by them. Just coming back to the operation management plan as well, members are also reminded that as per the wording of the original condition, as shown here in green, the details pursuant to this condition are required to form part of the operation management plan, which in turn forms part of the agreed Section 106 obligations pursuant to the parent consent. Condition 3 of the parent consent sets out the heads of terms for the Section 106 agreement and requires an update operations management plan to be presented to Planning Committee in advance of the commencement of works. This is expected to be presented to committee later this year. Condition 3 also requires the final operation management plan, as shown here. It's required to be submitted and approved by the Planning Committee 6 months in advance of the opening of the bridge, with further reviews required post-opening. Officers consider that the submitted document is fit for purpose, noting the input of relevant technical consultees. However, the inclusion of these details as part of the operations management plan provides suitable safeguards to secure changes to the management regime, should they be required, as further details are worked up in advance of opening, or indeed should problems arise once the bridge is open. In light of this assessment, officers recommend the approval of details of Condition 46 of the parent consent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll move now to the contributions from the objectors. If you'd like to start, we'll start the clock when you're ready. You have 2 minutes. The clock will beep 30 seconds before your 2 minutes are up, just to remind you to draw to a close. Please be mindful of other people's time, so end properly at the beeps, please.
I have not burdened you with the usual detailed forensic email from me providing evidence of what is wrong with this application. Don't take this, or the smaller number of objectors here, as evidence that objectors have dried up. Following your approval last month of a toilet block for an attraction with visitor numbers akin to the Eiffel Tower, but fewer toilets than the Clapham Picture House, people are unsurprisingly contemptuous of this process. They are fed up with, and I use a word I haven't used in 20 years of making reps to PAC, they are fed up with lies about consultation. A lie is an untruth, known to be untrue, but presented as true. We have told you over and over and over again about the non-consultation, but the claims in the report are false. By now you should have instigated a thorough review of what is going on, but instead the lies are simply repeated. But nothing which you have passed over or ignored matches the issue of public safety off the bridge along the south bank and backside, which we raised in 2014 and about which nothing has been done. In a week following Hillsborough's 27 belated years of justice, it is extraordinary that still nothing has been done to analyse the impact of this major visitor attraction upon the whole of the Riverwalk. The police have not been consulted, and no analysis has been done about the complication of impacts of multiple developments, the Tate extension, the huge new developments of Blackfriars and the Garden Bridge, on a walkway at Oxo and Blackfriars Bridge which is 5 metres wide. Were this a football stadium, police would be crawling all over it, but they have not commented on this aspect at all. Will some of us be sitting here again in 27 years' time, after the deaths and the cover-ups, wringing our hands saying we didn't realise? You might well find my comparison unsavoury, but we find Lambeth's extant supine confidence in its ignorance disgraceful. Apart from a couple of honourable exceptions, one of whom has been removed from this committee for having the temerity to think and say what they think. Officers will respond in the usual way by talking about something else and refer to the police consultation, knowing full well that this is about safety and security by design on the bridge and immediately off it, not what happens in that 5 metre wide Riverwalk at Oxford or Blackfriars. Please think about these things for once. Thank you.
Why does the committee and council put tourism before the welfare of residents, families, workers and commuters in North Lambeth? Waterloo has become a shambolic heaving juggernaut of tourism and stuffed with requisite overpriced modernist hotels. What about the community? Right from the start, residents' concerns and formal objections have been systematically obscured and ignored with disdain by the committee and planning officers, who all seem absolutely determined to sell off the public land of Queen's Walk to the private sector, the Garden Bridge. Condition 46 1.3. This is incorrectly described. It does not identify Upper Ground and Coin Street as the closest residential streets to the application. All the residents in these streets are against the bridge, all live in social housing, all are being ignored by Lambeth. No doubt the majority of the committee and planning officers are homeowners far, far away from Waterloo. Perhaps they feel those in social housing have less right to object to public land and river being sold on for a monster tourist bridge on their doorstep. 4.1. There was no presentation to a local housing co-op, none whatsoever. This is a fabrication. Anyway, why would residents want a presentation? There should have been a formal consultation at least 2 years ago, but there wasn't one. The community drop-ins are a sham. The Garden Bridge Trust hid in back rooms with poor signage that were not visible to the passing public. B. Emmett says 87% of Londoners support the bridge. Really? Truthfully? In reality, that figure has been discredited as a manipulative and highly misleading straw poll which described the concept rather than the reality of these proposals in this location. To date, the Evening Standard poll is 59% of Londoners against the bridge. The Garden Bridge Trust do not, and never will communicate honestly with Londoners and the community. They just want cheap tourism and assured private profits from their newly privatised land. The 11,700 leaflets, these were inaccurate and misleading from the start, with falsified images of the bridge and visitor numbers. Many local people did not receive the majority of these leaflets. 7.17. Planning officers state there were 7 objections. This may well be, but they represented hundreds of objections. Officers chose to mention just 2, Teakos and Mulberry Housing Co-op, but all 4 Coin Street co-ops, Europa Park, Reading and Holbury,
end there, because otherwise we'll have to take time off your other
representing
speakers.
hundreds of residents.
And TICOS has hundreds and hundreds of supporters who oppose the bridge as conditions.
Just waiting so I can see the time.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks. Thank you. This report has not considered the location of the Garden Bridge and South Landing building on the Queen's Walk, current dwell times and usage, and therefore the projected dwell times are highly questionable. People have picnics on the open green space that last more than 1 hour. They sit on the benches over their lunch hour, overlooking the river, eating sandwiches, and they romantically watch a sunset that can take longer than 45 minutes. They watch the activity happening on the shore below, which are sometimes bagpipers and sand artists. They take in the view and after a while decide to take selfies, several selfies. The average dwell time of 25 minutes is vastly underestimated. This will have an impact on crowd control. In the report at 3.1.15, it is stated that there are no commercial enterprises or outlets on the bridge or landings or any other type of premises that could act as a crime generator. This statement is ignoring the fact that the flexible space on the ground floor, which forms part of this application and conditions, has a potential use as a commercial space. The square meterage, the equivalent to 2 Tesco Metros. This report does not bear this in mind. 2.5 speaks of movement of visitors with mobility need. When the Garden Bridge Trust wants to, it seems that it uses TfL figures and report and the Royal Park policies when that suits them. Given this is supposedly a park and a transport facility, they should always provide both perspectives. It uses statistics that don't reflect the people that I see use the Queen's Walk, from families, cyclists, and the mobility impaired, large groups, etc., etc. The landscape of the local area in relation to increased commercial activity has increased significantly in the past 2 years, from bars and restaurants opening out on the Queen's Walk, from the National Theatre and at the Mondrian Hotel. In the summer,
30 seconds.
Yeah, in the summer and Christmas seasons, peak demands are more than just what the report states as Saturday peak hour. The exceptional status is likely to happen on any day of the week. The report denies that there is no need to reconsider the transport assessment that was done in 2014 in relation to the parent application. You should request that in the upcoming operations management plan update that this is part of the pre-commencement conditions. That an updated transport assessment is done. I'm really sorry.
You've had over. I know that was. You had way over 2 minutes there because it wasn't working. So you did have time to make your points. You had more than 2 minutes.
I base how I speak based on the time. At a minute, normally the beeper goes.
Yes, and I'm apologising for the fact that wasn't working.
Can I make a point based on condition 6, which hasn't been referred to by my colleagues, and that I think is a really important point to make?
Out of respect for the fact that the clock wasn't working, you have 10 seconds to make a point. Okay, just add it on now.
So, I want to know if I need to see it on my thing. Do we know the scouring impact may have on the beach area that falls immediately underneath the proposed Garden Bridge and stretches towards Yoxo Building to the east and to Festival Pier to the west? What is the point in something being PAC referable if councillors are considered unable to determine this information given that you weren't given the technical briefing? I urge you to reject these conditions.
Thank you. Sorry for the confusion there. With hopefully the clock is now going to work. It was actually showing 8 minutes at one stage, so we'll just sort this out now. Okay. So 2 minutes now. If you've decided between yourselves as supporters who's going to speak first. Yep, I'm ready to start when you are.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Trifunovic, and I'm an associate at OVAF and Partners Limited, and I am the author of the Scour and Accretion Monitoring and Mitigation Plan, or SAMP for short, on behalf of Garden Bridge Trust. The SAMP sets out a robust framework for how scour and accretion around the bridge, cofferdams and piers, as well as foreshore and adjacent flood defences, will be mitigated and monitored during the construction of the Garden Bridge. It also considers cumulative development effects due to the Thames Tideway tunnel project. It has been prepared with extensive consultation with the Environment Agency's flood defence and biodiversity teams, as well as the Port of London Authority, and incorporates their specific requirements as follows. Monitoring is proposed to check for evidence of scour at the base of the South River Wall during the construction stage, with reactive intervention if necessary, such as temporary rock fill bags placed at the toe of the wall. More frequent monitoring is proposed to check for any evidence of scour around the cofferdams during the 11-week installation period, and if necessary, short-term scour protection may be deployed. Once the Garden Bridge is in operation, there will be no change to the existing situation in the vicinity of the South River Wall and foreshore, so no additional measures are necessary. During the lifetime of the Garden Bridge, permanent scour protection will be placed around the piers. Table 12 of the SAMP outlines the required monitoring extent, frequency, duration and methodology, including trigger areas and levels, along with reporting pro formas. The SAMP also stipulates the procedural mechanisms whereby permission and licences for remedial works should be sought if deemed necessary during construction. The Garden Bridge Trust agree with the Environment Agency, Port of London Authority and Thames Tideway, and the offers of recommendation for approval of this condition 6.
Good evening, my name is Paul Foster. I'm representing the Garden Bridge Trust operations team, and I've been supporting the development of the crowd management plan. For the London 2012 Games, I wrote the crowd management plan for the external area of the Olympic Park. During the Games, I oversaw that operation, moving 250,000 people per day, 12 million people over the Games period. In 2014, I was employed by Peace Scotland to oversee the crowd management operations in Glasgow City Centre. Last year, I oversaw the crowd management operations in Richmond Town Centre during the Rugby World Cup. And I wrote the crowd management plan for the Super Bowl City in San Francisco a few months ago. The Garden Bridge crowd management plan is based on the agreed assumptions and data set out in the transport assessment, which was approved by this committee back in December 2014. The Garden Bridge can comfortably accommodate the longer than average dwell time of 25 minutes outlined in the transport assessment. As a result of this, the peak occupancy would not exceed 2,300, and therefore no crowd management mitigations would be required. However, in the unlikely event that dwell times do increase or visitor arrivals increase and go significantly beyond those agreed within the transport assessment, our modelling has demonstrated that the proposed crowd management measures will be highly effective. We're lucky that we are aware now of the expected peak hours and will advise people of how to visit and travel to the Garden Bridge. The Olympic Games is highly successful, with 42% of people changing their behaviour as a result of this messaging. Other measures will also include one-way flows, temporary barrier systems, slowly rate arrivals onto the bridge while maintaining the rate of departures. The Garden Bridge will be the only space in London with real-time data on accurate occupancy and dwell times. This will assist ensure a proactive approach is taken to visitor management. During the peak periods, we'll have at least 10 trained and qualified visitor hosts and a duty manager to manage this bridge environment.
We can try not to interrupt speakers when they're speaking and show everyone the same courtesy.
Good evening, my name is Michael Wood and I'm employed by the Garden Bridge Trust to develop the crime and enforcement elements of this submission. In doing so, I've drawn upon my professional experience of over 30 years of policing in London. As a borough commander, for example, I was responsible for implementing a range of strategies to reduce crime and disorder, and was commended by the Home Office for establishing the most successful crime and disorder reduction partnership in England and Wales. During my career, I also worked on Lambeth Borough for 4 years as a member of the senior management team, including as Chief Inspector Operations at Kennington Police Station, responsible for the policing of the local area, including the South Bank. In developing the General Enforcement Plan, the Trust has followed national standards, guidance and best practice to design a comprehensive range of measures to manage the bridge environment. The Garden Bridge will be well resourced with trained, qualified and accredited staff using proportionate powers and procedures supported by appropriate physical and electronic security measures. The proposed conditions of entry are based on and are consistent with the regulations in place for similar open spaces in London, particularly the Royal Parks, but also the nearby Jubilee Gardens, and are in keeping with the spirit of the Port of London Authority requirements to maintain the safety of river users. The plan has been created in consultation with local operators and reflects the emphasis placed by the Trust on collaboration. The Trust is already a member of the Lambeth Business Crime Reduction Partnership and the South Bank Business Watch. The Trust have committed in the document to publishing information about enforcement activity on the bridge, developing consultative arrangements with the local community, maintaining intelligence and information sharing links with partners, and working collaboratively with local operators, including, for example, joint enforcement patrols with the South Bank security team. The completion of the plan has been subject to close scrutiny by relevant experts from the Metropolitan Police, who have expressed their satisfaction with the proposals set out in the document. The Trust note that Westminster City Council approve this document and support the officer's recommendation to approve. Thank you.
Okay, board councillors, if you'd like to introduce yourself again, and then you've got 2 minutes as well. Councillor Mosey, Digital. The first thing I'd like to highlight with respect to tonight's application is that it concerns the erection of a pedestrian bridge with an incorporated garden.
not a park or privately owned open space. Many people have read today's Evening Standard, in which the Director of the Garden Bridge Trust seeks to influence and predetermine the decisions of this committee. It is interesting that the only communications or interactions by the Director of the Garden Bridge Trust is now through the Evening Standards and not with stakeholders who actually matter. It's an insult to us, and it's an insult to the intelligence of this committee. In the article, she states that the conditions were similar to the conditions of a royal park and other open spaces. This is a false logic and yet again deliberately misleading. The business case for the bridge is that of a bridge with a garden on it and not a park. I live in Waterloo and I cross bridges daily without any interventions from the forms of pollution or restrictions proposed tonight. Contrary to B. Eminent's concerns, I do not see anyone fishing from Waterloo Bridge or dropping litter onto boats below. Are people's mobile phones monitored on the bridge near the Tate to monitor visitor numbers? Clearly, the proposed behaviours of those on the bridge will be entirely different from every other bridge in London, in B. Emmett's estimation. Why is that? It appears then that the Garden Bridge Trust is trying to reinvent the core function of the Garden Bridge, dependent on its needs and public relation requirements. We already learned recently that Garden Bridge Trust refers to its donors as investors. As per the draft heads of terms published by Lambeth, the project is clearly a private enterprise seeking to deploy a private police force with no clear argument as to why these are necessary versus other bridges. We are unsure whether the bridge will be a park, a bridge, a tourist attraction, or most probably a party venue for its investors, simply because the Garden Bridge changes its mind to suit its investors, as I've said. If you grant it tonight, we'll be setting a precedent for the privatisation of London's open spaces, which ignores our city's heritage and the right for its citizens to move in that city. Thank you. And not private investors own.
Councillor Benkind, I would like to echo the concerns about the lack of consultation on this document, raise how there's been criticism of the lack of consultation by the Garden Bridge Trust by our colleagues on Opening and Scrutiny Committee, and would ask for the committee to at least acknowledge that the consultation does not include consultation with the local community and stakeholders as it lays out. With that in mind, I know that the report makes a suggestion that there'll be a reliance on the local Safe Neighbourhoods panel, and I would invite members of the committee to ask whether they have been included any prior consultation on this, as they have direct experience of dealing with the problem of illegal gambling and illegal trading on Westminster Bridge in the South Bank. It's been one of the core priorities for the Safe Neighbourhoods team in the local area. Explicitly within that, whether they've spoken to the residents that attend, and the chair, Mike Tuppin. I'm also grateful for the clarification about the numbers of staff on the bridge, but again would invite members to ask about whether that will be 6 members of staff on the bridge at all time, as the diagrams in the presentation suggested, or whether it will be 6 members on site at all times, i.e. will they be sat in the break room, in the staff room, will they be doing the monitoring of the CCTV? And I think at some points in 3.5.10 of the report, it talks about them being asked potentially to go and help out manning the toilets downstairs. So it'd be interesting to know through your questioning whether that will be 6 on the bridge at all times, or whether it will be on the back. And like Jen, I have concerns about the statement 5.2.1 about the security force for the bridge issuing fixed penalty notices, and would ask you to consider whether you really want to be authorising a private, heavy-handed enforcement regime to be able to stop people, demand they give their names and addresses, seize their personal possessions and dispose of them as part of the privatisation of public space. We've already seen similar places in Manchester try to ban swearing, and we've seen people being evicted from Granny Square near King's Cross for taking photos. This is part of that process. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we have an opportunity for members to ask in this first section any questions, and I'd ask you to ask them of officers in the first instance, and only if officers decide that they need additional information or I decide it might be helpful, will we go to objectors or supporters. So any questions from members? Councillor Cedar and then Councillor Atkins.
The Wi-Fi crowd counting system sorry.
Sorry, that's my fault. We are going to have the discussion separately for each condition. So we're going to discuss condition 6 first of all. Sorry, I should have made that absolutely clear. So questions in the first, and then we'll take the vote at the end on both of them. So any questions relating to the scouring condition 6? Councillor Hazelton.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I had on scour and accretion. I found myself looking at the intertidal zone. Any of us members of the public who have taken walks, very well guided, within London walks along the intertidal zone know that the area is one of the largest self-excavating archaeological sites, I think in the country, and possibly Western Europe. And that sensitivity didn't show to my eyes in this report. Now, I can't believe that hasn't been covered, but I'm asking a question really, seeking reassurance as to whether that aspect has been looked at elsewhere, or whether it's embraced, in opposite view, by the terminology used in this report, since it's already a sensitive issue in that Thames Clippers already scour and so on. So I want you to reassure me or accommodate that.
Yes, Councillor. The archaeological position is actually secured under condition 36, which seeks the submission of a written scheme of investigation for archaeological mitigation. That scheme was presented to officers last September and was approved, so the condition was part discharged. That was in consultation with Historic England and their archaeological advisor, Mr. Stevenson. I have a copy of that document in front of me, and what it does look for is details of, it does secure a watching brief of dredging of the riverbed at both bridge piers, a watching brief of excavation construction activities on the intertidal foreshore, and monitoring of scour effects. So all the aspects relating to scour and accretion, specifically to deal with archaeological matters, are secured under condition 36 and safeguarded.
Any other questions? Councillor Morrison.
Yes, I think it was suggested by the objectors about the impact of scour on the beach area. I just wondered if I could have a bit more information about that and whether that's been looked at.
Yes, within the submitted document, the SAMP in short, it does identify a number of hazards where potential river scour might actually take place, and the river foreshore is actually identified as one of those potential hazard areas. So as a result of that, there is a programme of monitoring suggested within the document, and if a certain trigger level, and I believe that the trigger level for this particular site is 0.3 metres below the riverbed level. So if that scale of erosion takes place, then the Garden Bridge Trust would implement a programme of reactive measures. And I think, as the colleague from ARP has just discussed, that will be a kind of rubble-filled bag system, effectively, which would prevent further sediment from being eroded from the foreshore.
Any other questions? No? Do you want to ask any questions in relation to condition 46? Councillor Sedat will go back to the original. So Councillor Sedat first of all, and then Councillor Atkins.
Thanks, it's about crowd counting and the different methods of crowd counting. Is that information going to be used in real time, or is it, what happens to that information? Is it sent back to some sort of wider management report? How will we use that information?
So there's two methods of crowd counting. I think the primary method will be through the high specification CCTV system, which will be used effectively to count the number of visitors onto the bridge and subsequently count them off again. The Wi-Fi tracking, I understand, will be more with respect to understanding dwell times, and also perhaps which areas people of the bridge are perhaps congregating. It is a real-time system as far as I understand it. I'm not sure if Neil can perhaps...
The Garden Bridge Trust have actually built in an element of contingency with regards to Wi-Fi, because they've accepted that not everyone has a Wi-Fi capability device. So that is factored into the calculations. So the Wi-Fi will monitor the dwell times of people on the bridge but it isn't the only method of entry and exit from the bridge. The use of the HD smart CCTV, as well as the physical, the actual guard force, the visitor hosts, they will be also there to monitor people entering and exiting the bridge. They will control crowd numbers.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, I mean, the real question about what happens with that information, how it would be acted upon, these concerns about congestion, and when this, you showed a diagram of the queuing system, for example, will the information that's collected from all these fancy systems be used in a rapid kind of way, especially during peak summertime?
It's my understanding that that information will be used to inform the visitor hosts, perhaps to implement a particular queuing system or to react to a particular situation, but I don't know if the applicant wants to expand upon that any further.
So as mentioned, there's two key bits of information, which is occupancy on the bridge, which we can't reach, which is 2,500. And another important bit of information for us is dwell time, so assessing how that changes. We can affect arrivals and departures by information we give to people when people arrive. Dwell time, we can't affect people beyond there, as long as they wish, but obviously that's their profile. The Wi-Fi tracking, there are a couple of systems available. It's widely used in airports to see how long it takes you to get through security. It's used in Westfield, and it's used in a lot of shopping centres. We collect no personal information. There's a hash code attached to the information that we get from that, so it's then encrypted, and it would meet with any European guidelines in terms of data protection as well. But by the time the bridge opens, there's probably some technology is being upgraded then, so we'll review what the most appropriate system would be.
I mean, considering there's been lots of comments on the validity of the numbers, and it's not the first time it's been brought up again, and the first time I understand once the bridge is open, it gets to that point, we get this data in. Surely we can make use of that information. Is there something we can do from the planning perspective regarding the management plans, etc., based on the information that comes through right from the very early days?
Yeah, as explained in the presentation, there is the opportunity to review the operation management plan going forward. So once the bridge is open, it will come in on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd anniversary of opening, and also on the 5th anniversary. So if there are any particular issues that arise as a result of or in relation to crowd control, and if there is any information which informs how long people dwell or how they access the bridge, those types of issues, those things can be revisited to see if there's an appropriate solution to the problem.
Councillor Atkins first, and then Councillor Hazelton.
Okay, you've covered this partly, but if there are static queues and overcrowding, that becomes a regular rather than exceptional feature of the Garden Bridge. I mean, what steps will be taken to ensure that we actually eliminate these queues and overcrowding and make sure the site is safe? Now, as part of that, perhaps you can also address the issue that Councillor Kind raised about the number of staff that would actually be on the bridge as opposed to just on site.
In relation to the visitor hosts, so the minimum agreed number of visitor hosts is 6. And it's certainly my understanding, unless the applicant wants to correct me, it's my understanding that they will be all on the bridge structure itself, or on the podium deck. I think the question of CCTV, that hasn't been bottomed out, whether it's going to be on site. The document suggests that there is a real possibility that that will be off site. So if that's the case, obviously there will be no visitor hosts monitoring the CCTV. In addition to that, the concern about perhaps a visitor host being used to man the public toilets, we can actually secure that through the public toilet strategy, which forms part of the 106 obligation. So we can ensure that no visitor hosts will be used as a toilet attendant in that respect.
Will they actually be, I mean, the issue is, will they actually be on the Garden Bridge, not having breaks? Or are we talking about a minimum of 6 actually on the Garden Bridge structure itself?
Can we ask the applicants to clarify exactly what they mean? Because I think that's what you were leading towards, is that we just very briefly clarify, is that 6 plus the duty manager on duty on the bridge, or is it 6 plus the duty manager in a rota and elsewhere, sort of on the podium or on the bridge? If you can just clarify exactly what that means, so that members can have a really good understanding of what those numbers are.
Okay, so the resourcing figures for the minimum period include 1 duty manager and 6 visitor hosts. That, of those 6, clearly they will need to be refreshed and fed, briefed, and so during the day, those activities will be taking place. So there will be points during the day, yet to be agreed, because we haven't developed the deployment profile yet, when there will be fewer than 6, but they will be in the South Landing building, so technically they will be available for deployment in, or if the need arises to deploy them.
Would our transport advisor like to respond to the first part of that question around the visitor numbers building up?
Yeah, in terms of whether overcrowding and static queues become a regular feature of the Garden Bridge site. I mean, we're talking about, in exceptional circumstances, queues will be dealt with by these hosts. But what if that becomes a regular feature and your modelling is wrong? You know, modelling has been proved wrong before. What will actually happen? What is the plan B in relation to overcrowding?
My understanding is that essentially there'll be the systems that are used to monitor and count people on and off and monitor dwell times. As and when there is a build-up, then there's the capacity that there is on the South Landing and also the North Landing for storage in effect and managing the flows onto the bridge. If that persists or is a regular situation, what the Garden Bridge team will then have to do is look at advising people through the media and whatever other methods they have as to basically advise as to, you know, to come at different times or stagger arrivals, all that sort of thing. It's using measures outside the immediate vicinity of the bridge as well as those that they would use to manage the approaches and actually across the bridge as well.
That's the plan B, telling people via the media. I mean, I would hope that there would be a reassessment of what should be done to make sure that the situation is safe for all concerned.
Well, if the question is essentially if the modelling transpires not to be what actually happens, then I think the vehicle then is the operation management manual, which is an ongoing and like a live document. It is the scenario being talked about is the busy Saturday, the late in the afternoon August busy Saturday. It's also included the fact that there's a 25% uplift, which is sort of the London Eye factor, if you like, which is what you would expect in the first year. You know, the extra pull of it in the first year before it settles down. I think it's quite, you know, that's obviously the busiest hour at the busiest time. The Garden Bridge has got the arrangements in hand for dealing with once you start to accumulate people in general. Now that's something that could happen for a variety of reasons, and they have a plan to manage that and deal with that. If the scenario happens, if the scenario continues that is something that perhaps happens very, very regularly, and it can in essence be managed at the point of the bridge, then that's where, you know, the ongoing process of the operations manual and the ongoing process of the Garden Bridge talking to all the other stakeholders, that's where they'll have to get together, work out how, you know, essentially they're going to have to advise people, use the media, use email, use whatever they have to stagger people's arrivals, which is not an unusual scenario. You know, that does happen with other attractions.
So no real plan B. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Morris, and just before Councillor Morris asks a question again, can I just ask people, I know there are strong feelings around this, but committee members need to be able to hear the responses so that they can make a decision. Councillor Morris.
I was just going to, what I was going to ask was I think it's been hinted at, but presumably if it transpires that the level of activity on the bridge is higher than anyone has predicted, I presume that would then that the review of the operations management plan would allow the planning authority to impose further conditions. Perhaps officers could help us about what the operations management plan would do, how often it would be reviewed, and the rest of it. I think you did cover it in your presentation, but I think it might help if you could just repeat that.
The operation management plan, just to repeat it, is a live document. So there will be a final version coming before committee for determination 6 months in advance of opening. However, there will be opportunity to revisit that on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd anniversaries of the bridge opening, and also on the 5th anniversary. As far as I'm aware, there is also the prospect of officers of the planning authority being able to request a review if a situation arises. So if there was a specific crowd control issue and we were concerned with public safety, we as a planning authority would reserve the right to call the operational management plan in for review and seek changes to that respective part of it.
Councillor Clark?
I've got a number of questions, but I'll start with a couple just on the crowd management of the bridge, on the bridge itself, so not on the podium, but on the bridge. People have been referring to different dwell times. I think I've seen something as well on there being great views on both the east and west sides, so people crossing over. I guess we've seen some detail on on getting onto the bridge, but actually in terms of active management of people on the bridge itself, particularly at various potential pinch points, either where there's lots of seating or just generally where the crossing over points are.
In terms of on the actual bridge deck itself, just to revisit one of the details of the approved transport assessment is the fact that the bridge deck capacity would be limited to 2,500 people, and that's on the basis that there has to be the safe evacuation of people on the bridge deck within 10 minutes of any emergency occurring. Now, on that basis, it actually transpires that the bridge deck itself isn't going to be overly crowded. And as part of the originally approved transport assessment, it was demonstrated that on the bridge deck, even with a capacity of 2,500 people, that it would achieve a freedom level of service of A, which indicates the free movement of people. So officers don't consider that there would be any suggestion of overcrowding on the bridge deck itself. In respect of where visitors will access and exit the bridge, in a busier situation, such as the elevated situation, which was shown on screen earlier, what you do have is you have a number of visitor hosts, which would be positioned. So, for example, you have a visitor host here, which helps direct people on and off. So there is a degree of control how people exit to the bridge.
Following on from Councillor Clark's point, when we have looked at this on other occasions, there has been the description of the bridge as having a sort of a faster area to walk through and a slower area. The sort of planting and the landscaping of the bridge I seem to recall drawing people into a more meandering route as opposed to yes. So the sort of So would that have an impact?
Yes, essentially, there's a 4-metre path. Then as you go over the piers and the structure widens sort of locally over the pier and takes back in again, the 4-metre path splits into 2 3-metre paths, as you can see on there. And then there's obviously, that's where the flows could deviate away from a single path.
If I can just go back in there to reiterate, this hasn't formed any part of the discussion that we've had with the applicant in relation to this condition. It's been accepted as part of the transport assessment that there will be a freedom level of service at A, which is the best possible level that can be achieved. So we don't consider any on-deck overcrowding to be a problem.
Quite slightly surprised by that because that's been something that's been referred to quite a number of times. And my perception, my sort of visualisation in some ways of how people move on the bridge is that you would have people who are maybe some people using it genuinely as a bridge and access point, and then other people, doing a walking tour of London or something like that, sort of just moving off. But then the actual way that the bridge is landscaped is to invite dwell times off those, you know, those offshoots of the main part. So I'm surprised that it wasn't part of those discussions.
Just to come in there, Chair, one of the key things that Richard did say earlier is there is a maximum capacity for evacuation purposes, which is 2,500 people. The Metropolitan Police, and in particular the counter-terrorism specialist, has advised that you can't go over that figure. So the evacuation plan, which does have to come back in front of members at a later stage, will be predicated on a maximum visitor numbers on that bridge deck of 2,500 people. So the crowd control aspect of this plan is also predicated on that. At that level, at that quantum of visitors on the bridge deck, you will have a comfort level of A based on the frame assessment. So we don't envisage that you are going to have a crowded scenario on the bridge deck with that number. It's a 366 metre long bridge, widens to 30 metres over the piers. We feel that 2,500 visitors can comfortably be accommodated on that bridge without any overcrowding.
Sorry to labour the point, but it's the path space, isn't it? The pedestrians are going to be on the path space as opposed to where the trees are, etc. So whilst the area, the square meterage of the bridge as a whole is one figure, the areas where people can stand is another. So I'm just surprised that wasn't formed part of the discussions. Councillor Clark, following up on that point, and then Councillor Morris, sorry.
It was to ask on that Froome figure of an A, does that take into account what's the numbers of I guess, parents with pushchairs, disabled mobility buggies, people carrying bikes and other things that take up more than one person's worth? And then the secondary to that as well, I would question just on factoring in the queues for the lifts of those of people with those items, just to clarify exactly where the queuing for that would take place.
With regards to PRN visitors, there's different percentages for the different times of the week. Essentially, weekdays assumed to be around about 8%, and that's obviously people that most likely use the lift, and at the weekends a high percentage of bidding on 12%. Those figures are based on the figures at the proportion that you expect to see at London railway stations. Now, with London railway stations, the proportion, probably the greatest proportion of people that have suitcases, things like that, whereas with this sort of attraction, there'd be more people with pushchairs, buggies, that sort of thing, maybe wheelchairs. So, but in overall percentage, that's where that's come from. There are two lifts. Each lift can hold 17 people, and if you make the assumption that that's the proportion of people that turn up, the lift capacity will be fine for that. The lift capacity can cope, and that should be generally a free flow situation.
Councillor Morris.
Yes, I just wanted to go back a bit to something that the objector said about the Metropolitan Police not having been consulted. I mean, I was just wondered if officers could clarify that, because the officers have referred to the involvement of the Metropolitan Police. So if we could just have some clarification on that. And then in relation to the Safer Neighbourhood panel, that seems to be, Safer Neighbourhood panel seems to be part of the sort of ongoing involvement, and I just wondered if officers could say a bit more about that. And then I had another question that I'll come back to afterwards, because it's not quite related to the same thing.
In relation to the Metropolitan Police, I confirm that they have absolutely been consulted on Condition 46 and they've raised no objections. In addition to that, I know the specific concern here is in relation to crowd control. We have consulted Lambeth's emergency planning lead, who pulls together all of the kind of blue light emergency services considerations, and she's raised no objection to the crowd control section. In relation to the Safer Neighbourhood plan, officers have sought, the Safer Neighbourhood Forum, officers have sought a bit more clarification from the applicant as to how they specifically intend to consult with neighbours. They've come back and advised that they feel that the best vehicle for doing that is making use of the pre-existing arrangements, and one of those would be the Safer Neighbourhood Forum, given that they specifically are set up to design with matters of crime and antisocial behaviour. The updated addendum document also explains that if they cannot secure an invite for that particular forum, then they would look at other ways to consult. But that information, again, is something which can be worked up and approved by members as part of the final operation management plan in a possible way.
Is it possible from the ward councillors, I'm not asking for a big interjection here, but obviously Safer Neighbourhood ward panels, are self-organised by the community with the involvement of the police, and so some are more active than others. Can you just give an indication as to how well established and regularly meeting the Safe Neighbourhood panel is in this area?
I wouldn't be confident that it's the body that can best do the job now. I think we should be demanding that they set up a separate group to deal with this, because the panel, I can't remember the last time I was invited. I don't know when you were residents who live locally, not you, Michael, but I don't think residents locally have been invited either. Yeah, so I'm not so sure that it's the body that we as a borough should be looking to represent this. And so much of the rest of the document was drawn together with the visitor management group that represents businesses in the area. But again, within that, there's been no attempt to seek the councillor's involvement within that body either. So the bit that's missing there is what is the local scrutiny of that? At the moment, none.
I mean, obviously, in a ward where the Safe Neighbourhood panel is working properly, then that absolutely is the place where local councillors and the police and residents are all organising together to meet concerns. So maybe that's something that officers can look into, as time goes on.
It meets regularly. It's affected. It's completely swamped by this issue. It's kept out. You can't feel the content. The chair is quite clear about it.
Well, perhaps the officers could think about how we can deal with this at this stage, but there does need to be some effective local reference group that deals with community safety issues that involves the residents and everybody some way or another. I don't know locally whether the Safe Neighbourhood panel does that or doesn't do that, but if it doesn't do that, there needs to be some body that deals with it effectively. I don't know whether we can write that into this condition or deal with it in some other way.
Yeah, if I could just come back in. As I've said, there is a cascade mechanism here where we can secure these details once they're worked up as part of the operation management plan. So certainly if it's something that members feel strongly about, that there isn't capacity to do it through this identified vehicle, then it's made clear through an informative that another solution is reached once those details come back as part of the operation management plan.
Would suggest that would be helpful, and also that there is some communication with the ward panel and the community police associated with that panel as well. Councillor Hazelden's been waiting for quite a while. I know you've got another question.
It's a leap in, but thanks. One's been answered. I absolutely endorse what's just been said. I think absolutely have to secure a panel for the time being at least, which ideally could migrate into SMP, the panel locally, in good time, all being well. I also share the concerns about securing about the mechanisms of staff resourcing. I do think it's really important that everyone is confident that the opening phase at least has really secure numbers and presence of visitor hosts, and then in good time, if the case wants to be put, that they're reserved supply, and that's the right way around, not to start off with the possibility of people being in the mess room and so on, and that was touched on a little while ago. And I'm also interested in the, aside from the predicted peaks, I'm not sure it's officers or yourself, sorry, whether, in what way you respond in a live way to some possible surges. So, how do you rush like extra staff when they aren't actually scheduled against an ad hoc situation arising? Another question which is quite on the thing. Shall I say on Queen's Walk is part of Thames Path, which has road ambition, so about walking and cycling throughout its whole
could just come back to the first question, so just to be sure that's in relation to staffing numbers and about being sure that being satisfied that we're confident that there is a minimum number that's supported through the document. If I could just add to the fact that it has been reviewed by the Metropolitan Police, and this was one of the key things that played out through the discussions that took place post-submission, that this was a key issue for the Metropolitan Police about getting a firmed up answer on what the minimum level of resourcing was. And the answers came back that 6 would be the minimum number of visitor hosts on the bridge, in addition to the duty manager, and the Metropolitan Police have confirmed that they raised no objections to that. The document does specifically state that additional members of staff would be made available at busier times. And answer your question about the exact mechanics about how that would be achieved if there was a particular peak, there's nothing within the document, to the best of my knowledge, that answers that. So perhaps the applicant themselves might be able to address that.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. I think the first one would be that the crowd management plan starts months in advance of the bridge opening. We saw from the Olympics 42% of people changed either their route or the time that they went to work or went and did a leisure activity. So we intend to put that in place. It's commonly termed as travel demand management. TfL do that every day. So it's not, won't be no surprise that we will encourage people to come on maybe Saturday morning as opposed to Saturday afternoon, and also consider how they arrive at Garden Bridge, potentially utilising Temple Tube Station. That has a positive effect for us in terms of flattening out the profile, as we call it, and it will also have a positive effect for the South Bank areas as well, where you have busy areas, retail, coffee shops, etc. on a Saturday afternoon. People won't just go to the Garden Bridge, they'll go to use other services as well, and that will enable that to be spread out as well. So it'll have a positive effect in terms of the flows of people on the across the
It's not just Saturday, it's the whole of the summer it's busy. It's really, really ridiculous.
And just to your point in terms of opening, just in terms of opening, yes, very, very good point. Yeah, we will have a higher number of visitor hosts in the opening days, weeks and months. We won't put a time frame on that because it's, as we require, there will be a peak in activity when people want to be the first on the bridge, and it's also our best opportunity to learn, get the team very, very familiar with the operations. So there will be an increase from the moment we open.
Okay, I think Councillor Morris had another question that wasn't related. Oh, sorry.
Yes, if I've interpreted your question right, the sort of permissive cycling, considerate cycling situation on the Queen's Walk is what you're referring to. Queen's Walk is a highway. Now, the Garden Bridge, essentially, you can physically take a cycle up there, but you're not meant to cycle across it, physically cycle across it. I don't envisage that having any impact at all on any cycling activity on the Queen's Walk. I mean, if you cycle on the Queen's Walk, then if the conditions, I mean, I've seen people cycling on the Queen's Walk, so if that, I imagine remaining exactly as it is. If any of the people using the Queen's Walk and the cyclists then decide to go across the bridge, then they just adhere to how you're supposed to cross the bridge. So I wouldn't see that having any impact.
Just for clarity, it's whether this condition will impact on the bankside route along Thames Park.
No, I wouldn't see that there being any impact.
Okay, so Councillor Morris had another question, and then Councillor Clark, and then I want to try and draw to the end of the questions, if at all possible, and move on to our discussion. I'm sorry that I wanted to, as well as the other question I had, I do want to follow up on this visitor host numbers, and to really bottom this out, because when I'd read the report, I'd been working on the assumption that it would be 6 plus 1 actually actually in operation rather than having breaks, and I just wondered whether the officers have said that the Metropolitan Police is satisfied with that, but just wondered whether it was 6 plus 1 actually working, or whether it was 6 plus 1 with some not working. I mean, I think that's quite important, really, that what it is.
The 6 plus 1 scenario is envisaged outside any peak hours. So once peak hours kick in then it's envisaged that there will be additional numbers of staff. How they actually manage break situations, etc., is not something which is addressed within the report. So I'm not sure if the applicant wants to expand upon that aspect any further.
I suppose my question is really whether what the Metropolitan Police were consulted about, whether it was 6+1 on the bridge or whether it was 6+1 staff, some of whom might not be on the bridge at any particular point in time.
It's my understanding that it was just a minimum number of staff on the bridge. I don't know if there was any discussions about breaks. Like if you
Yeah, there absolutely was. I mean, the reality is we've set out a resourcing model for the 12 months that takes into account peak and off-peak periods. So when we've modelled our resourcing figures and discussed it with the Metropolitan Police, they absolutely understand that when you have 6 people on duty for an 8 or 9 hour period, as they're likely to be, that during that time there'll be periods when some of them, not all of them, will be having a break for one reason or another. Now they are likely to take their breaks in the South Landing building and so will be immediately available should the need arise.
I can't guarantee that.
They'll be absolutely available should the need arise. Now those are our off-peak figures, 1 and 6, and as we move into the 4 months of the summer, so May, June, July and August, we will add additional resources, not just on Saturdays, but for every day of the week. And we will build up to a minimum figure of 10, which will enable us to more than adequately cope with the anticipated numbers who are going to be on that bridge. I think it's unreasonable to expect us, or people who are working on that bridge, not to have a break, so understandably, that 1 and 6 will take into account the basic needs of people who will be on duty. And that is entirely meeting the requirements of the Met Police.
It's been very dangerous when it's crowded.
Can you please let officers and everybody else? Yeah, I know we have heard what you have to say, and now is the opportunity for members to ask questions, to clarify details, and I think you'll find that a lot of members have taken up the issues which you as objectors have raised, and we are talking about them now, but we need to get the answers. We need to be able to hear the answers clearly. Councillor Morris.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just want to be certain that the Metropolitan Police were clear that it was 6 staff on duty, but not necessary, but taking breaks, or 6 staff actually on the bridge and operational at any particular time. I just want to be clear what it was they were consulted about.
They were consulted on the figures related to resourcing, and as part of that conversation, we obviously discussed the requirement for members of staff who are working on the bridge to take a break. Now the resourcing profile would be such that they wouldn't all take their break at the same time, so maybe 1, perhaps 2, depending on the busyness of the day.
Why is that not in the report then?
Then I suppose the other question I had, which was a sort of almost the opposite of what everybody else has been asking, which is to do with the fact that I mean, none of us know exactly how the operation of the operation of the bridge is actually going to pan out. So what everyone has been talking about is the worst case scenario. But it does seem to me that that all the sort of security arrangements and everything all seem to be based on this worst case scenario. And I was just wondering whether, if in the fullness of time, it's a bridge that's used like any other bridge, and that we don't have issues of crowd control and all the rest of it. Whether there's a whether somewhere built into the operations plan we have the sort of ability to be able to sort of row back on some of these what seem to me to be quite strong security measures.
So all aspects of the operational management plan will be subject to review. So if there are any aspects of security which at some point down the line it's not considered to be reasonable to enforce, then those regular reviews do allow opportunity to revisit those aspects of it. So yes.
Councillor Clark.
On a similar theme, I'm just trying to better understand the conditions of entry and the powers that the visitor hosts might have. I think Councillor Mosley referred to one bit, which I can't actually find the specific wording on some of those, the powers, but I'm just trying to understand what is the difference between the conditions of entry on this bridge compared to all the other bridges nearby, and why there's a feeling that that there needs to be different conditions of entry on this bridge rather than on all the other bridges. And then second to that, it was again to get an understanding of the powers that are being given. Who else has similar powers around? Are they similar to the, sometimes business improvement districts have extra security guards or police? Just trying to get that sense of where those powers lie.
Thank you, Councillor. The conditions of entry was drafted following discussions with planning enforcement officers as well as development management officers. It was considered necessary in which to provide an enforcement framework in place so that if there's any illegal gambling or illegal trading on the bridge, then those activities are actually set out as prohibited acts within the conditions of entry so that we have a framework in which to guard and prevent against such incidents occurring. But the document actually alludes to a proportionate approach so that in some instances the advice of the visitor host is necessary rather than taking any other action.
I think, Councillor, just coming in on your point about a direct comparison with other bridges in the locality, I think we've always been very clear with all the conditions we've reported to date that this particular piece of infrastructure has a dual role. It's both a bridge and a piece of transport infrastructure, but we do acknowledge it is a visitor attraction in its own right. You don't have that with other bridges, including the most recently constructed bridge up at Tate Modern. All of the bridges were constructed pre-planning as well, so there isn't any methodology for putting planning controls or a management plan in place. This is quite unique. It's a very unusual proposal, hence the reason for the management plan, which was put on at the request of members as well.
And the powers.
So the visitor hosts will be trained to they will be approved to a community safety accreditation scheme, and that does give them the delegated authority to take meetings and things like that. I don't have an exact comparator on that, to be quite honest with you. I'm not sure if, again, the applicant wants to explain that.
It would be typical of security workforce employed, for example, on the South Bank, who are accredited under the Community Safety Accreditation Scheme, which enables them to exercise discretionary activity for minor offences, including antisocial behaviour, and also gives them the power of confiscation in certain circumstances. So in essence, it's an extension of the existing regime, which is to be found in place on the South Bank, and will provide a seamless level of delivery between the bridge and the South Bank as well, and is entirely consistent with that approach.
Not true. Okay, councillors, do you have any more questions? No, good. Councillor, very briefly, and then I do want to, so last one, thank you.
It was just in relation to something that had been actually for both conditions. There was the question had been raised about the possibility of a review more than simply the 1 year, and who could. I think Richard, you mentioned that there was the possibility of requesting reviews where it was wanted. So it's just having the understanding not only as for PAC but also for residents if they wanted to then talk to their councillors to request such a review to get that understanding.
So the review is of the operation management plan. So just to be clear, it's only the details pursuant to condition 46 which will feed into the operation management plan. The details in relation to condition 6, if approved, they will be implemented effectively during the construction phase and onwards, but there's no scope to review those as part of the operation management plan if that wasn't actually included within the wording of the original condition. Condition 46, conversely, it is very clear that those details will come forward as part of the operation management plan. And as I said, that plan is required to be reviewed as part of the heads of terms of the Section 106 agreement on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd and 5th anniversaries of the bridge opening. But as I've also said, if there are any specific issues which arise once the bridge is actually open, then we as an authority do have the powers to effectively call that in for a review at that time.
members, I'm going to first of all ask us to look at condition 6. Are there any comments that members would like to make before we move to a vote? Councillor Clark.
Just specifically in relation to the answer that we've just heard, is there, I would like to suggest an amendment to the condition so that there's a potential for a review process once the bridge has been in place. For instance, if the beach, the conditions on the beach are different, beyond the, in advance of the review process, is that a possibility?
It's my understanding that we can't condition a condition, but we can, what I suppose I'm going to ask officers to do, is there within the scope of the various review triggers and review mechanisms that we have before us, is there any reason why Councillor Clark's design to theory review wouldn't happen if it was needed?
But just come back on that point, just to be clear though, Councillor Clark, the details pursuant to condition 6, which is the river scour and accretion monitoring plan, that's not something which will form part of the operation management plan. The concerns about the foreshore, just to give you some comfort on that, the submitted document does specify that there will be a regular monitoring regime in place of that, and there is an agreed course of action agreed with the Environment Agency, Thames Stagway Tunnel, Port Development Authority, if any erosion of that foreshore does take place. So that is dealt with via that plan.
And so residents or some people could contact the councillors, or the council could then feed that back to that review, regular monitoring process. Right.
Not for condition 6 still. So the issue about review as part of the operation management plan, that's solely condition 46, which is the illegal trading, etc., etc. The details pursuant to condition 6, that, if approved, I wouldn't envisage that they would come back before committee unless there's any change to the actual document itself. So there wouldn't be an opportunity to review any aspect of that.
I think, sorry, I'll be much clearer. Sorry. If, for instance, there was concern that the beach, the foreshore, was being eroded or damaged, and after the bridge was constructed, and there was a concern that that might be due to the impact of the bridge, how would somebody, whether we as councillors or PAC or whoever, manage to get that across to ask the questions on whether that was indeed an impact, and therefore would there be any impact, any actions taken?
Yes, Councillor, the last line of the planning condition does say that if monitoring works are required, it does say any required remedial works identified as a result of the monitoring, which will be an ongoing process, shall be completed within timeframes to be agreed in writing by us as the local planning authority. So if Garden Bridge Trust do approach us and say that as a result of the ongoing monitoring there is a requirement for remedial works, an approach will be made to the local planning authority. We could then, at request, if members wish, involve councillors and ward councillors in those discussions and make them aware that there has been a requirement for remedial works. So that could be secured through an informative on any decision for condition 6. That if there is remedial works, the local planning authority does engage with ward councillors.
I can also just provide some comfort on that matter, and the report does actually discuss exactly what river scour monitoring consists of, and it's quite explicit that it consists of feedback from the Environment Agency. So if any of the local residents were observing any particular erosion, they could bring that to the attention of the Environment Agency, who in turn could bring that to the attention of the contractor.
Okay, so that also sounds like something that everybody needs to be aware of in terms of who would be alerted, and maybe that's something that the Garden Bridge Trust can publicise at some stage. Councillor Morris, does it relate to, we've sorted this out now, so is this your comment?
It is a comment in that, I'm not a civil engineer, obviously, and this is the first time I've come across scour and accretion, and I've read a lot about it. I'm getting to be familiar with the subject, but it does seem to me that that 0.3 of a metre sort of reduction is actually quite a large one, but I don't know whether that does seem to me the reduction in the level of the riverbed, or presumably by implication the impact on the beach, is actually quite substantial. I just wondered whether that could be reduced as a trigger.
I would advise against getting involved in changing the triggers that we've worked with the statutory consultees to arrive at. I think it would be unhelpful to start suggesting alternative triggers when we've had the input of the technical experts to that process.
So the Environment Agency have been specifically agreed to the 0.3 metre trigger, have they?
They have, and the 0.3 trigger in relation to the foreshore is actually the lowest trigger. So in other sites, for example where the coffer dams are, the actual level of erosion is greater than what the trigger is for the foreshore. So that's actually the minimum trigger.
I mean, it is one of those cases where, like some other conditions that have come back before us, one of the main reasons why it was coming back to us was so the Environment Agency, the Port of London Authority, and the Thames Tideway Tunnel, who are all experts in this matter, have the opportunity to say what they felt about and guide us in terms of what was going to happen in terms of the monitoring. And so they have said that they are happy with it. I suspect we should take officer advice on this. Any other comments on condition 6? No? Okay. I think I'm going to move to a vote on that one now, if that's okay. And then we've drawn the line under that. So can I, what I just want to do is make sure that we note the fact that there wasn't, although we can't condition a condition, that there was an additional informative added, which was suggested by the Environment Agency, which is on page 25, 6.6. So we just have to note the fact that that additional informative, which concerned the fact that you now have to have a permit if you're going to do anything within 60 metres of the flood defensive. So we're just noting that informative. But subject to noting that informative, can I see a proposer that we accept officer recommendations in relation to condition 6? Councillor Sedak, can I see a seconder? Councillor Morris, can I see all those in favour? That's unanimous. Okay, so that's dealt with condition 6. Now moving on to condition 46. Do committee members have any points that they'd like to raise? Just before we start, I shall jump in with the fact that we have had that rather detailed conversation around the ward panel, the Safer Neighbourhood team, and I would like it minuted that I think I hope committee members agree with me, that we would like there to be some more work done by the time that the operations management plan comes back to us around how the Godbridge Trust liaises with the Safer Neighbourhood ward panel, and that direct contact is made with the chair of that, and ideally also the community police, because I think that will help a lot to make sure that is a good, in theory it's a good body to perform that role. We just need to make sure that it's actually going to work in practice, and I think committee members will want to know that, so that's that point. Any other points?
Well, I was just going to modify that slightly. I mean, given that there seems to be some disagreement locally about which the right body is, that I think that what I would like to be satisfied about is that when the operations management plan comes back, that some effective and accountable and community-based arrangement is in place for the Garden Bridge Trust to work with people in the area, including residents who are concerned about community safety. Now, if that's the Safer Neighbourhood panel, then that's all well and good. But if it's some other organisation that would be effective in doing that, then I think that would be equally acceptable.
that's absolutely fine as a request, Councillor Marsh, partly because that's already built in, as Richard said earlier in the answers to one of the questions. They would have to come up with an alternative, and I think we can note the views that you've set out about how that body should operate in terms of involving local residents.
Okay, any other points that committee members want to make?
Just to say that I'm still not convinced by what I've heard about crowd control and the number of visitor hosts and their powers.
Anyone else? Councillor Clark?
Yes, it was echoing what my colleague Councillor Atkins has said, but it's particularly for me, there's I say that dual role that is there, and we can't get away from it from the fact of the parent application of the fact that this is both a bridge and a visitor attraction. But I still have not yet been convinced by the arguments that I've heard here in terms of why we need the special powers on this bridge, as opposed to if there are the problems that have been noted. I've experienced on the illegal gambling and street traders on Westminster Bridge, on other bridges nearby, for instance, on the Jubilee bridges. Why have they not being coming back and asking for special powers? And the police saying, actually, we can't deal with this on our own. We need a different regime, or else, why is it just for this bridge? And I do have my concerns that haven't been assuaged. In terms of what I've heard today, in terms of that particular aspect.
Morris, I just wanted to come in on that because I thought, I obviously don't know in detail what goes on the South Bank, but I thought that the applicants had suggested that the South Bank already has wardens that have these powers. Can officers help me on that?
The South Bank Employers Group do have a patrol, but their remit, as I understand it, is the South Bank Queen's Walk area itself. The majority of the illegal trading, as Councillor Clark has referred to, does actually take place on the bridges themselves, which I understand is outside South Bank Employers Group remit.
I think the point I'm asking about is whether the South Bank Employers Group wardens, or whatever they're called, have the powers that are now being suggested for the Garden Bridge visitor host.
This was brought up earlier about whether there was a comparable example, and I didn't have an example, but I'm not sure if Mike wants to explain that.
The key issue, in essence, and why the Garden Bridge is distinct from Westminster is, in essence, their status. One is private, but with permitted access, and Westminster Bridge is a public space. Now, I think if you were to ask any police officer to raise your example there about whether or if they could have additional powers, they would probably say yes. The reason they can't is because of the legal framework under which Westminster Bridge operates. It's in essence a public space, it's a highway, it's not a private place, and they cannot impose their own terms and conditions. They may or could seek potentially to introduce bylaws subject to the approval of each respective local authority. The reason the Garden Bridge doesn't have to do that is because of our status as a private space with permitted access. The absolute advantage that gives us, and the people who will be using that bridge, is that we can therefore introduce a regime with conditions of entry which enables us to manage that bridge safely, learning from the examples of Westminster Bridge and the issues that they have. So we can bar people and exclude people and eject people who are seeking to be on the bridge under civil powers because they become trespassers. You can't apply a similar process to Westminster Bridge because it's a public space and they aren't therefore on private land and aren't trespassers. So although the concept of the bridge potentially is a little unpopular because of its private status, it gives the trust, the local authority and the people who are on it enormous benefits in terms of how we manage that. And that's the key difference. And that's the key difference why we have the conditions of entrance.
No,
Thank you. Councillor Morris. I don't think I've had an answer to my question about what powers the South Bank Employers Group wardens have.
So there are dual sets of powers potentially which our visitor hosts can use. The Community Safety Accreditation Scheme is available to both private and public spaces. So the South Bank patrol officers are accredited to use their Community Safety Accreditation powers in the public place, which is the South Bank, and our visitor hosts can use both the conditions of entry, and we can also apply for Community Safety Accreditation because we are a private space. It's the same as many hospitals do, or many schools do, in terms of having private security to operate. It's entirely legitimate to have both schemes operating in tandem.
I still haven't had the answer to my question, I don't think. I'm sorry. What powers do the South Bank Employers Group wardens have?
So they are given those powers under the scheme which authorises community safety accreditation. So that involves the capacity and the ability to stop people who are engaged in antisocial behaviour, potentially who are engaged in public drinking, and they can confiscate drinking. There's a provision to seize tobacco from people who are under 16. They can deal with cycling, in theory. They can demand a person's name and address. There's no power to detain a person if they don't. There's no power to detain a person if they don't provide a name and address. But they do have a power to ask for it, and it is a criminal offence if they don't provide it. But there is no power to detain them, and there's no power to arrest them. So they are in essence an extension of minor powers that warranted officers have, and they are given to people who are performing a security function in a public or private space, and absolutely authorised by the local chief officer of police.
Thank you. Any other points that committee members want to make before we move to a vote? No? In which case, can I see a proposer that we accept officers' recommendations to grant approval of details relating to condition 46? Councillor Cedar, can I see a seconder? Councillor Morris first. Can I see all those in favour? Can I see all those against? Thank you very much. So that is passed 4-2. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I think that's the last of the pre-commencement conditions, but obviously there will be more to come. We're going to have a 5-minute break according to that clock, which for once is right. We will start again at 9 o'clock with the next item on the agenda. Thank you very much for your time.